Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to really get into something, I think is super relevant to all of you guys. We're talking about the female factor.
Okay.
Yeah, and how it really impacts, the whole dynamic between genders today.
Right.
Especially for you guys listening, I know you're all about figuring out these covert contracts in your own relationships and how everything's kind of shifted, in institutions over time, right?
Absolutely.
So we're gonna really unpack some stuff from the female factor. Have you heard of it?
Yes, great book.
Yeah, it's called, the full title is Dissecting the Misconceptions of Gender.
Yeah.
And it's by this guy, Conrad Riker. And it's really gonna help us shine a light on these things.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's fascinating too because Conrad Riker, he's coming at this whole thing from a male perspective.
Oh, interesting.
So it's he's trying to give this rational, balanced view of gender dynamics, and he doesn't shy away from controversial stuff. He talks about women's emotional nature, evolutionary psychology, all that.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, Riker talks about women's solipsistic tendencies.
Right.
Now I know that's a big word.
Yeah.
But what it really means is women often experience the world through a super emotional lens.
Right.
And those emotions, they shape their reality in a way that sometimes makes it hard for them to be objective, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And that can be a huge source of conflict in relationships, especially if you're not aware of it.
For sure.
Riker gives this great example in the book. It's imagine a woman gets a promotion at work. Okay. A man might just be like, yes, score.
Straightforward.
Yeah, straightforward win. But a woman, she might feel all these different things at the same time.
Yeah.
Excitement, of course, but then also anxiety, self-doubt, maybe even some guilt.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you're right. It's way more layered.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not about women being difficult on purpose.
Right.
It's literally their emotional processing is shaping how they see the scene.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then Riker takes it even further, right? He's saying this heightened self-awareness in women, this tendency to go through that whole emotional process, it probably developed as a survival mechanism.
Oh, yeah.
Way back,
Way back, evolutionarily.
Yeah, back in the day.
Exactly, yeah. Women needed to be, super attuned to their own feelings and their children's feelings to make sure everyone...
Wow, that's so interesting.
Right.
Okay, so then how does all this help us understand how institutions have changed? That's a big one for our listeners.
Well, Riker, he makes this connection between, get this, the maternal instinct and the rise of socialism.
Whoa, hold on. Explain that.
He's saying that same instinct that drives women to, take care of their kids. It might also influence their support for these socialistic systems that promise to provide for everyone.
Oh, interesting.
Right. And he points to how women often vote for policies that support things like social welfare, education, healthcare.
Yeah, okay, I can see that.
Right.
Okay, so on the surface, that sounds okay, that's nice, caring for others.
Yeah.
But Rucker says there might be a downside too, right?
Right. He argues that this maternal instinct, even though it's coming from a good place, can lead to subtle forms of oppression against men.
Okay, like what?
Well, he points to things like, gender quotas in employment, where companies are basically forced to hire a certain percentage of women.
Oh, yeah.
Which could mean overlooking qualified men.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Right. So it's not about women intentionally trying to put men down.
Right.
It's more like this instinct to nurture and protect. When it plays out on a societal level, it can have these unintended consequences.
Okay, so it's like the road to hell is paved with good intentions kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So for our listeners, this raises a question.
Yeah.
Are the policies and institutions you guys are dealing with, are they really fair? Or do they subtly favor one gender?
Yeah.
Thinking about this dynamic can really help you navigate those systems.
Exactly.
Now, another concept that really hit me hard was this idea of women viewing men as objects of labor.
Ooh. Yeah.
What's that all about?
Well, it goes back to evolutionary biology again.
Okay.
Riker argues that historically, women needed men to provide resources and security.
Makes sense.
It's like that classic line, I need a man who can fix things around the house.
Right.
And it's not that women can't do those things,
Yeah.
It's just there's often this deeply ingrained expectation that men should do them.
Oh, for sure.
And this goes beyond just, fixing leaky faucets.
Yeah.
It extends to providing financially, emotionally, all that stuff traditionally expected of men.
Totally.
And Raker's saying even though these expectations seem harmless on the surface,
Right.
they can make men feel used and like their main value is what they can provide.
Yeah, like a walking wallet.
Right. And that ties right back into those covert contracts we try to figure out.
Have you ever felt that pressure?
Yeah.
Like, you're expected to be the provider,
Yeah.
but like your own needs aren't really being met.
Sure.
That's the imbalance Riker's talking about. It's not about blaming women, though.
Right.
It's about understanding these deep-seated dynamics so you can start creating relationships that are more like equitable.
Exact knowledge is power.
Right. Okay, let's talk about Riker's take on modern feminism.
Okay.
He doesn't hold back here.
Yeah.
He basically argues that while feminism started out aiming for equality,
Right.
it's kind of shifted towards portraying women as like constant victims
Yeah.
and men as like the oppressors.
Right, the bad guys.
Yeah.
He uses examples like the hashtag #MeToo movement. While it definitely brought attention to sexual harassment, it also created a situation where men are sometimes assumed guilty without, a fair process.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard those arguments before.
Yeah, and he connects this back to the whole idea of institutional capture. Riker says these narratives have like seeped into our institutions, places like education, the legal system, the media, and they've really shaped how we all view these gender roles.
Yeah, it's almost like you can't even question it.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about solipsism, the maternal instinct,
Yes.
the whole objects of labor thing,
Yeah.
and now a critique of feminism.
Okay.
Now let's dive into evolutionary psychology.
Okay, that's a good one.
What's that all about?
Well, it often causes a lot of debate,
Yeah.
but it gives us this fascinating lens to look at gender dynamics.
Okay.
Basically, evolutionary psychology argues that our behaviors today, like right now,
Yeah.
they're shaped by the stuff our ancestors had to deal with.
Oh, interesting.
The traits that help them survive and reproduce, those are the ones that got passed down.
Oh, so it's like survival of the fittest, but for behavior.
Exactly.
Okay, so how does Riker apply this to how women act?
Well, he talks about women's focus on appearance. From an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense, right? Women would care more about how they look because attractiveness helped them snag a mate who could provide resources and protection.
Right, like a good provider.
Exact. Someone who could ensure their survival and the survival of their children.
Okay, I get that. Makes sense.
He also talks about women's preference for high-status men. Again, back in the day, a man with power, influence, he would have been able to offer greater security, more resources.
So basically a good catch.
Right. So even though these preferences might seem a little superficial or outdated today, they could have this deep biological basis.
Wow, that's making me think differently about a lot of things.
Yeah, that's what Riker argues. He thinks understanding these evolutionary drives can help us understand some of the things men and women do that seem irrational. It's all about understanding the why behind the what.
Oh, this is giving me a lot to think about.
Me too.
And I know for our listeners who are already like deep into this journey of figuring out covert contracts and societal structures, this book offers some powerful tools, don't you think?
Absolutely.
It's like a challenge to like question everything you think you know, question those narratives, and really look into the biological and evolutionary roots of behavior.
Yeah.
And that leads to a deeper understanding of the whole dynamic between men and women. And this is just scratching the surface, guys. There's way more to explore in Riker's book. You can find The Female Factor on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
It's definitely worth a read.
Yeah, for sure.
It's really valuable for anyone who wants to understand the complexities of how men and women interact and to like figure out those covert contracts and how to navigate them better.
That's what it's all about.
Welcome back. So before the break, we were getting into some pretty fascinating stuff from Conrad Riker's The Female Factor, talking about how women process emotions, how the maternal instinct might be playing a role in institutions, and that whole idea of men as objects of labor. All these pieces are really key for understanding those covert contracts and how things have shifted historically in our institutions.
Yeah, for sure. And there's so much more to unpack. I know Riker spends a good chunk of the book talking about the role of men in society, which is something I know our listeners are super interested in.
Oh, absolutely. And he approaches this by first highlighting how men have traditionally been seen as providers and protectors. And he links these roles to biological factors like testosterone, how it makes men physically stronger and more competitive.
So he's saying these traditional roles aren't just some random social construct. They're actually rooted in our biology.
That's exactly it. He brings in evolutionary psychology here, arguing that men's drive to compete and achieve, that goes way back. It's like, think about our ancestors, right? The guys who were the best hunters, the strongest warriors, they were the ones who survived and passed on their genes.
Oh, so it's like those traits that helped our male ancestors thrive are still a part of us today.
That's what Riker's saying. And he even connects it to the modern world, like how men are still more likely to take risks, go for those physically demanding jobs, and always aiming for positions of power.
Okay, that makes sense, but then how does that fit with the fact that the role of men seems to be changing so much these days?
That's a great question. Riker acknowledges this shift. He argues that the rise of feminism and progressive ideologies, they've really challenged traditional masculinity. So now a lot of men are left feeling confused and unsure of their place in the world.
Yeah, it's like they're told the old rules don't apply anymore, but nobody's giving them a clear alternative. It's no wonder so many guys are feeling lost and frustrated.
Exact, and that ties back into this whole thing about amending those covert contracts. If the old rules are out the window, but there aren't any new ones that are well defined, it creates a recipe for resentment and
So
misunderstanding.
how can men navigate this whole changing landscape without losing those core strengths and values that make them, well, men?
Riker says it's about adapting to the new realities while staying true to those essential masculine qualities. It's like finding that sweet spot, a balance where you can have a sense of purpose and identity even though the world's always changing.
I like that. Okay, so another topic that Riker tackles is the influence of Marxism on gender relations. This is something that's often debated, especially in the married red pill community.
Right, and Riker offers a really interesting take here because he doesn't just automatically condemn Marxism. He acknowledges that Marxist ideology has actually helped to challenge traditional gender roles and push for more equality for women.
Yeah, that makes sense. Marxist theory is all about getting rid of class structure, so in theory that should also dismantle gender-based oppression, right?
Exact. But here's where things get interesting. Riker argues that Marxism has also led to some unintended consequences that have been harmful to both men and women.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of those unintended consequences?
Well, for one, he talks about how the emphasis on economic equality in Marxism has often come at the expense of individual freedom and responsibility. He suggests it's created a culture where people feel like victims and entitled, where they blame all their problems on outside forces instead of taking ownership of their own lives.
So it's like while striving for equality is important, it shouldn't come at the cost of individual liberty and accountability.
Exactly. He also talks about how Marxism has contributed to the breakdown of the traditional family structure.
How so?
He argues that the focus in Marxism on communal living and getting rid of private property, it's really undermined those traditional roles of husband and wife. This might be why we're seeing a rise in single-parent households and a decline in how important people see marriage.
So it's like, yeah, challenging those traditional roles can be good in some ways, but we also have to acknowledge the value and stability those roles can bring.
Right, and Riker also points out that this whole idea of class struggle that's so central to Marxism, it's often been used to pit men and women against each other. It creates this battle of the sexes that actually prevents genuine equality and understanding.
Yeah, it's like it sets up this dynamic where one gender is always the oppressor and the other is always the victim. That's definitely not a recipe for healthy relationships or a harmonious society.
Definitely not. Riker reminds us that finding that balance, that sense of shared responsibility and respect for each other, that's what's really crucial. Okay, shifting gears a bit. Let's talk about queer theory and how it's influencing how women view men. This is another area where Riker offers some really thought-provoking perspective.
Okay, let's dive in. What's his take on queer theory?
Well, he starts by acknowledging that queer theory has really challenged those old-school ideas about gender and sexuality. It's opened up important conversations about identity and inclusivity.
Right. Queer theory basically says that gender and sexuality are fluid, that we shouldn't be boxed in by these rigid categories. It's an idea that's gotten a lot of attention in recent years.
Absolutely. But Riker also brings up some concerns about how queer theory is impacting gender relations.
Okay, I'm curious. What are those concerns?
One of his main concerns is that queer theory often focuses on deconstructing traditional masculinity. Now, challenging the toxic aspects of masculinity is important, but he argues that this deconstruction can leave men feeling alienated and confused about their place in the world. It's like they're losing a part of themselves without a clear path forward.
So it's not just about tearing down the old, it's about offering a positive vision of what healthy masculinity looks like today.
Exact. Riker also points out that queer theory often portrays men as inherently oppressive and privileged. Now, acknowledging male privilege is important, but he cautions against lumping all men together.
Right, it's about recognizing that men can be allies in the fight for equality, not just obstacles.
And he argues that this kind of blanket condemnation can create a backlash against queer theory, which makes it harder to have those productive conversations about gender and sexuality.
Yeah, it's like it creates that us versus them mentality again, which never helps.
Right. Riker also suggests that because queer theory emphasizes the fluidity of gender, it can sometimes make it hard for men and women to understand and relate to each other. He's not saying that gender identity isn't a spectrum, but he does say that it's important to recognize those biological and psychological differences between men and women.
So it's like acknowledging both the fluidity of gender and the reality of biological sex, both are important.
Exactly. And Riker believes that understanding both of those is key for building healthy and fulfilling relationships between men and women.
Okay, we've gone through some pretty dense stuff. The role of men in society, Marxism, and the influence of queer theory. Let's talk about something that's super relevant for our listeners. Gender studies and how it relates to men.
That's a good one, because this is an area that a lot of men see as hostile territory. Gender studies is often seen as this stronghold of feminist ideology that's only focused on exposing and dismantling male privilege.
It's definitely a perception that I think a lot of men in the married red pill community share.
Definitely. But Riker, as always, offers a more nuanced view. He acknowledges that gender studies has brought up some important questions about gender roles and challenged those traditional power structures.
So he's not dismissing the whole field outright. He sees value in it.
Exactly. But he also expresses concerns about how gender studies is often taught and the impact it can have on men.
I'm curious, what are some of those concerns?
Well, one concern is that he argues gender studies often presents a one-sided view of history, focusing only on how women have been oppressed. He suggests this overlooks all the contributions men have made to society and just creates a narrative of male guilt and shame. It's like saying all men are inherently bad just because they're men.
So it's about presenting a more balanced view of history, one that acknowledges both the oppression women have faced and, indeed, the good things men have done.
Exactly. He also argues that gender studies often focuses too much on dismantling traditional masculinity. And while challenging the toxic parts of masculinity is important, he says we need to acknowledge the positive aspects of it too and help men find a sense of purpose in a world where those traditional roles are changing.
So it's about helping men evolve, not just telling them they're wrong.
Exact. And Riker also points out that gender studies often paints all men as inherently oppressive and privileged. While acknowledging male privilege is important, he says we can't just lump all men together like that.
There's that us versus them dynamic again, which is never helpful.
You got it. Riker believes this can lead to a backlash against gender studies and make it harder to have those productive conversations about gender and sexuality. He also points out that gender studies' focus on social constructivism can sometimes ignore the role of biology and evolution in shaping those differences between genders.
So it's like, yes, social norms are a huge factor, but we can't disregard biology and evolution.
Right. And Riker believes that understanding that is crucial for building healthy and fulfilling relationships between men and women.
It seems like gender studies, like a lot of things we've talked about today, is really complex and nuanced. There aren't any easy answers.
Totally. It's important to approach it with an open mind, to be critical of its limitations while also seeing the value it brings.
It's about finding that balance, that sense of perspective that helps us see the whole picture.
And that brings us to our final topic for today, woke culture and how it affects men. This is definitely a hot button issue that's causing a lot of debate right now. How does Riker tackle this?
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear his perspective on this one.
Well, Riker argues that woke culture, while it started with good intentions of promoting social justice, it's kind of morphed into something that often demonizes men and portrays them as inherently toxic. It's like the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction.
Yeah, and that can have a real impact on men's mental health and self-esteem. If you're constantly told you're part of the problem just because you're a man, it's going to take a toll.
For sure. Riker also argues that woke culture often promotes a victimhood mentality, encouraging men to see themselves as powerless and oppressed.
I see what he's saying. While recognizing male privilege is important, it's also important to empower men to be agents of change, not just passive targets of blame.
Exactly. And Riker is critical of how woke culture emphasizes political correctness and censorship. He argues that it stifles those open and honest conversations and creates a climate of fear where people are afraid to say what they really think because they don't want to be ostracized.
So while being respectful of others is important, it's also important to allow for different opinions and encourage debate. That's how we learn and grow.
Exactly. Riker believes those open and honest dialogues are absolutely essential for a healthy and functioning society.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. The role of men in society, Marxism, queer theory, the complexities of gender studies, and now woke culture. It's been a whirlwind of ideas.
It definitely has. And for our listeners who are really trying to work through those covert contracts in their relationships and understand those historical forces that have shaped our institution, I think Riker's book offers some seriously valuable insight.
I totally agree. It's like a call to action, encouraging men to be more aware of their own actions and motivations, to understand how women might be perceiving those actions, and to communicate more effectively. It's not about feeling guilty or blaming yourself. It's about taking responsibility for your part in the dynamic and working towards a more balanced relationship.
Absolutely. And just as important is understanding that women have their own set of deeply ingrained beliefs and behaviors. It's not about judging or labeling, but rather seeking to understand where your partner is coming from.
So it's about empathy, trying to see things from her perspective. Because honestly, both men and women can be caught in those covert contracts. Both can be victims, A&D perpetrators of those unspoken expectations.
And that's where Riker's book comes in. It's not a magic solution, but it gives you a framework for understanding these dynamics. It helps you have those tough conversations, address those imbalances, and build a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding.
That's powerful stuff. But let's be real. Changing these deep-seated patterns is hard. It's not going to happen overnight.
You're right. It takes honesty, self-awareness, and a willingness to challenge those ingrained assumptions. And it needs open communication with your partner, being willing to have those tough conversations and sticking with it through the bumps along the way.
It's a journey, not a quick fix.
Exactly. But imagine the reward. A relationship where those unspoken expectations are out in the open, where both partners feel seen and heard, and there's a genuine sense of equality and respect. That's what Riker's work is all about.
Okay, so for our listeners who want to dig deeper and continue this journey of self-discovery and relationship transformation, where can they go?
The Female Factor is available on Amazon Kindle and Google Playbook. Definitely check it out.
Perfect. As we wrap up, I want to emphasize that understanding the female factor isn't about blaming women. It's about empowering men with the knowledge and insights they need to create more fulfilling relationships and navigate a world that's always changing.
It's about recognizing that we're all shaped by biology, evolution, and our social conditioning, and then using that understanding to build a more just and harmonious world, one relationship at a time.
Well said. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep looking for those aha moments that can change your life.
And remember, that journey of self-discovery never really ends. It's an ongoing process of growth and evolution.
All right, welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been exploring Conrad Reicher's The Female Factor, really digging into how those ideas can give us some insight into covert contracts and those forces that are like shaping our institution.
We've really gone through a lot, haven't we? We talked about how women process emotions, that whole thing with maternal instinct, the idea of men as objects of labor. And then we got into how men's roles are changing in society and the influence of things like Marxism and queer theory. We even touched on those complexities in gender studies and woke culture. It's been a whirlwind.
Yeah, it really has. Riker's book has given me a whole new perspective on all of this. So now, with all these ideas floating around, what does this mean for us? For men, like trying to figure out relationships and navigate a society that sometimes feels like it's working against us.
That's the million-dollar question, right? And I think Riker's main point, the one we should really take away, is that we need to move past those oversimplified narratives about gender. You know, the ones that are always out there. It's not just this battle between sexes where men are the bad guys and women are the victims.
It's about recognizing that men and women are different, yeah, but those differences don't have to lead to conflict. It's about like getting how those differences developed, through biology A&D, how society shapes us.
Exactly. And realizing that those covert contracts you guys are trying to work through, they often come from these deep-seated patterns of behavior. And those patterns are in both men and women. It's not like one side is totally to blame.
So for someone who's actively trying to renegotiate those contracts, what advice does Riker actually give? Like, what can they do?
He encourages men to become more aware of their own behaviors and why they do the things they do, and to understand how women might see those actions, and then to communicate better. It's not about blaming yourself or feeling guilty. It's more about taking responsibility for your part in the dynamic and actively trying to build a relationship that's more balanced.
It's about realizing you have the power to change things, to shift those patterns in your own life.
Absolutely. And it's just as important to get that women are operating from their own set of deep-seated beliefs and behaviors too. This isn't about judging or labeling anyone. It's about trying to understand where your partner is coming from.
So it's about empathy, right? Putting yourself in her shoes. Because the truth is, we can both get caught in those covert contracts, men and women. We can both be victims and, do things that perpetuate those unspoken expectations.
Riker's book, it's not some magic solution, but it gives you a framework for understanding these things. It gives you the knowledge to have those hard conversations, to address those imbalances, and to build a relationship that's based on mutual respect and understanding.
That's a powerful message. But let's be real, changing these patterns that are so ingrained, that's tough. It's not going to happen overnight.
No, it definitely takes honesty, self-awareness, and that willingness to challenge those assumptions you've always had. And it takes open communication with your partner, being willing to have those tough talks and to work through the rough patches.
It's a journey, not a quick fix.
Exact. But think about the payoff. Imagine a relationship where those unspoken expectations are out in the open, where both of you feel seen and heard, and there's a genuine sense of equality and respect. That's what Riker's work is all about.
That's awesome. So if our listeners want to learn more, keep going on this journey of self-discovery and, transforming their relationships, where should they go?
The Female Factor is on Amazon Kindle and Google Playbook. I highly recommend it.
Awesome. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to make sure everyone knows, understanding the female factor isn't about blaming women. It's about giving men the knowledge and insights they need to build stronger relationships and navigate a world that's constantly changing.
It's about realizing that we're all shaped by biology, by evolution, and by how we were raised, and then taking that understanding and using it to create a better world, one relationship at a time.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, keep diving deep, keep asking questions, and keep looking for those aha moments that can really change your life.
Remember, that journey of self-discovery, it never really ends. It's a constant process of growth and change.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us, everyone.